Hi, this is Chris Howard, host of Plugged In with Chris Howard, and I'm taking the Lions over the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. BetOnline has free odds and lines available online or on your mobile device. Visit BetOnline today.
Welcome to the Media Roundtable, Industry Edition. You don't need the same preamble. We always do. This is the show where we come and we talk about all things audio in service of the people that work in the business. So there's a lot of news around audio and particularly podcasts. There are reporters assigned to the podcast beat. And we all see this stuff coming across, but then you read it and you go, huh, that's interesting. But what does that have to do with me? And what does that have to do with me today? And what does that have to do with me growing my business? And so in this format, what we try to do is get a panel of experts, whether they're people from Oxford Road typically, or sometimes we bring in people from the outside, and we just break down the stories really in depth and try to draw a line from the headline that you see and the implications of it to what does that actually mean to you as a marketer? And so I'm your host, Dan Granger. I'm the CEO and founder of Oxford Road. I'm glad to be here. I am joined by some of my favorite people to roundtable with. We have our head of creative services at Oxford Road, Mr. Stu Redwine. Welcome, Stu.
Happy to roundtable with you today.
Happy to roundtable with you. We have a very special person named Neal Lucey, who's our head of strategy and product at Oxford Road. He's usually, it's funny because in the office, he's known as being quite introverted and shy, but when he comes on this thing, man, he's got lots of opinions about stuff. So we keep having him back. Neal, welcome back to the roundtable. And he's on mute, as is typical. But he did wave for those of you that aren't watching the YouTube version. And then we have...
great to be here. Sorry.
Oh, it's great to have you. Thanks. So he just needs a little priming, but once you get him going, like now that the seal's broken, like it's on. And then of course we have one of everybody's favorite people, both on and off the mic, is Spencer Semonson. Spencer is one of the leading minds we have at Oxford Road and focuses on media. Spencer, first of all, welcome. Second of all, I'd love some context on your background. Spencer shows up every day with a different background that is always thoughtful and has some deeper connotations. So what are we working with here today,
maybe
Spencer?
not deeper, maybe just, I know I'm going to be on YouTube, so not inappropriate, but generally, yes, inappropriate.
Thank you for,
as per usual,
that designation. It's different. We have to have like our internal image, and then we have to have our external image. There's so much, everybody's got to do so much PR now. But I saw somebody talking about Spencer the other day in an email, and they referred to you as Spenstar, which I thought was a cool name. Like, is that a thing in media? Do you go by Spenstar a lot, or was that a one-off?
No, this is my branding across the media team, and maybe going forward, changing LinkedIn today.
Thank you. I think that's a good idea. I think it sticks. Well, welcome, guys. I'm glad you're here. There's a lot of things happening in the world. I don't know if you guys heard about some chat app that came out, and now people are using it and getting all types of information, but things are happening. The first thing that I'll talk about is the news that Hearst, William Randolph Hearst's little startup outfit on the East Coast, has now made an investment in somebody we know, one of our partners, who is Barometer, the brand safety and suitability tool. They participated in a seed round that made headlines and made a $2.25 million investment through Hearst Lab, which is super interesting because you see, not only is it interesting because we've been great champions for Barometer and the work that they're doing for brands for the last couple of years here, but also I think it's a signal when you see groups like Hearst, which are over a century old, trying to keep up with what's going on in the world today. And how do you stay relevant? What do you do when you're a big ship that's been cruising along for a long time? How do you stay relevant? How do you stay defensible? How do you not get, taken over by all of the tech that has come into the world? And for whatever got the ball rolling for them to start getting involved with brands like Barometer, I think it's worthy of admiration, and we're happy for both of them. And it's always cool to see the old and the new coming together to move the industry forward. So congratulations to both sides of that investment. We also have an announcement coming out of our friends and partners at Podscribe. Podscribe does a lot more than transcribing transcripts these days, and one of the things they're doing is brand safety and suitability. And so their announcement within the last week or two was that they have introduced a tool called Brand Safety GPT, which basically means that they are using the AI capabilities of OpenAI, the ChatGPT capabilities, and applying that to the GARM framework that we're also fond of using. And it's able to do a lot of things. It offers deeper context into things like sarcasm, providing transparency and reasoning behind the labels that are assigned. And it's something that's available for advertisers and publishers. So there's a lot of people coming into this space, but I think the topic that's always forever present, and we could spend every single episode talking about, and probably should spend some time on every episode talking about, is the elephant in the room that is AI and what that means in 2023, because I don't know of a field that is not in the process of realizing they're about to be heavily disrupted by this. And if you are building product, if you are in the business of providing solutions, and it is not something that is immune to disruption, congratulations. But for the rest of us, I think we all have to look around and go, all right, what were we doing a year ago the technology couldn't do for us? And what can we do today? And what does it mean when you have effectively all the best engineering capabilities at your disposal simply by using this external resource? Everything's changing. And most people I talk to, I think there's a general consensus that none of us can really even conceive the magnitude of what's going on right now. So congratulations to Pete at Podscribe. I think the thing that I would just flag that's important about this article with this coming out is that it is now here in podcast where you see somebody openly advertising the fact that ChatGPT has created a new capability for them. And so the real question I have is what's next? And so any thoughts or comments on this topic so far?
I mean, I think these technological developments, like, to me, it's a little bit harder to conceive of, I think, in the age of the internet. With AI, it's like, oh, well, it's doing this really complex thing or whatever. But I mean, it's like when these things come into play, whether it's the CD or stereo sound or the microphone, a new piece of tech comes into a space, it changes things and it shakes things up. And I think it's important to embrace it as quick as you can. I know that we are in creative development, and try to leverage it and have it help you and work with it as quickly as possible, because it's like, once it's here, it's kind of that famous thing with the automobile. If I would have asked people what they wanted, they would have said they wanted a faster horse. It's like, this is a kind of thing that's a game changer. So it's best to get on board with it as quick as possible. That's my take on it.
My take is anything. I mean, the way I've used ChatGPT is mainly to help me get to the answer faster, just to be more efficient, right? So it hasn't really been a complete game changer, but it's given me ideas that would get me to an answer that otherwise could maybe, take a couple hours, where I can okay, 15 minutes, I'm there.
Well, and it's still so fresh. I mean, people are comparing this to the printing press. People are comparing this to the internet, the iPhone. People are comparing this to fire or the wheel in terms of its impact. Some people are saying that this is bigger than all of them. And I think it's important when we talk about it, when we think about it, that we realize what you're looking at today is not what you're looking at, because by the time you even realize what you saw, the thing's gone miles ahead. I've got a daily email that I get now that just lists out all these new applications that are happening with AI. And I'm telling you, it's like 40 fundamental shifts every day that I'm seeing. It's quite overwhelming if you see where this thing is going. But like, think about what happened when you first found out about the information superhighway. Imagine the difference between that and today, and imagine that change all happening in a period of months. So, you know, I think that we're looking we're like driving, but we can only see the rear view mirror. And it's very, very important, I think, for businesses that are going to survive. And I think for all of us as workers, we have to realize that we're being disrupted very, very quickly. And I think we have to use a lot of imagination, not just about what can I do with the capabilities that are accessible right at this moment, but what do I think they'll be in 12 to 18 months, because it's going to be different. And so, you know, there's a re-leveling of the playing field now that we all have access to things that I think most of us didn't have access to before. Neal.
Yeah, I wanted to actually ask Stu, because I was looking at a piece of creative for a company that we've been talking to, and I saw a piece of creative they had done, and I thought that you could almost put any brand in that category on that piece of creative and you wouldn't know who it was. So then I just went into ChatGPT and said, hey, ChatGPT, write me a 30-second commercial in this category. And it kind of came back with the commercial that I was looking at. So I was wondering, from a creative perspective, I think like from a creative perspective, it's like, okay, I get these creative ideas, but is it just coming back to you with like what would be expected in that category versus something that's really going to lead to a breakthrough kind of creative moment or something that's really going to capture attention?
I think it's a great question. I think it kind of works like, you know, brainstorming or trying to get ideas out of humans, as well as like what you put in will help with what comes out. So to your point, like what you did is a great example. It has all this data it can work with, and it's so smart, and it's like it's creators, right? It's this pattern recognizing thing, and it manages to the middle. Like it makes this output that's like safe and right there in the middle, and it's going to be okay. And it's blasé and exactly what you would expect. But you know, what's cool about it is like, there's this fun copywriting game that I have at home. I don't have it here. I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it's these prompts, and it's like, write an ad for a doctor as if you're talking to mechanics underwater. And it's for humans to do that. With ChatGPT, I've kind of experienced the same thing, that if like I try to create connections that are odd or creative, then the stuff that it spits out is more interesting. But if I'm asking it to just do like, write an ad for an HVAC company, it's going to go, wow, is your house hot? Are you sweating all the time? You probably need new HVAC. Call HVAC guy. But if I go, hey, you know, what's the similarities between HVAC, a zebra, and a jeweler in 16th century Europe? Like, that could give me 10 ideas, ChatGPT. You know, that can start to get interesting, which is kind of what you were saying. And the way I've been experiencing it is that it helps me make those connections and make some new connections. And I feel like for every 50 ideas out of chat, 1 or 2 like help me go, I go like, oh, wow, that's interesting. But most of them are kind of what you started out this question with, which is like, dude, they're just safe. Yeah, it gave me high volume, but they're exactly what you would expect. They're very obvious.
Well, and we've had to deal with this because we've had this audiolytics framework we've been using forever, right? And we've iterated on it a lot. But I think the caution when using a framework, when there's logic beneath the creative, is that everything comes out sounding exactly the same. And I think one of the goals we've had in applying audiolytics, which Stu's done a great job overseeing, is making sure that the listener shouldn't know that there's a formula under this thing. It should still feel organic when you get the customizations and the execution of it. And my experience of copywriting and originating creative content using AI so far is that, yeah, it's not going to be that great. It's going to be soulless. And I think Stu makes a great point. A lot of this is garbage in, garbage out. It depends on how hard you work to train it and to customize it and to give it prompts that will liken it to other things. But that's why I say, like, what it can do today is not what it can do. Check this thing out a year from today and watch the level of nuance and sophistication, so that if you say, how would Billy Bob Thornton phrase these things in in an interview, and you feed it the same points, and then you go, okay, also upload the investor reports on this brand from the last 18 quarters, and and compare the competitive landscape and find the one thing that only this product can do. It's like, we haven't started. We really haven't started. But where this is going is really crazy. I was just reading a story about a guy that said, I have now offloaded all of my financial management to a Chat GPT application, where not only have they disputed all their recurring invoices that they didn't want to pay subscriptions on anymore, the gym memberships where they're held to a contract, it is drafting legal notices and actually asking you to check off a signature so that it can automatically mail an appeal to their headquarters authorized by an attorney. And it's like, that's doing this automatically. That's where we're at today. And like, we don't even know what it can do today, but what it's going to do tomorrow is really, really crazy. And so, I think we just all have to ask ourselves, what are we doing that's defensible? And what are we doing that is not going to be defensible much longer? And adapt to that. And, my thesis so far on all this is that the thing that the machine can never do is relationship. And I do believe that in persuasion, there's a layer of it that can never be orchestrated, no matter how polished it sounds. But we have to continue. The whole world is on a scavenger hunt right now to figure out what can we get these robots to do and what can we not get them to do. But I think what they cannot do may be as important a question as what it will be able to do. So anyway, that's our AI chat for this day. Thank you for coming to this section of it. We had some other news come out that I thought was interesting, because there were two stories back to back. We saw that, and this is so weird because like everybody we're talking about are people that we're partners with, right? Like, and because of this podcast, the two first stories are people that we have partnerships with. The next two stories, you have Spotify and you have SiriusXM, people that we do a lot of business with. We got financial reports coming out saying that Spotify's revenue is up 20%, and subscriber growth is happening in meaningful ways. Then you have SiriusXM, where revenue slipped by 2% and they lost almost 350,000 subscribers. And so, both of these are great platforms for brands, but one is gaining and one is losing share. What does this mean to marketers?
I have some thoughts.
Let's go.
I think the number one reason is just branding. Spotify has really good branding when it comes to social. It's an all-inclusive platform. Every new feature is in the news and elicits a news report. They are targeting Gen Z more and more. They are pushing barriers when it comes to video integration and social component. But besides that, SiriusXM has a lot of things under its umbrella. But when you listen to something under said umbrella, you're not sure where it's going to go. Is it an Earwolf property or is it a SiriusXM property? Is it a Stitcher property? Nobody quite understands that in the marketplace. And I think we're seeing that more and more when we talk about networks branding themselves, but also the turning tides of what is interesting people now that big acquisitions are becoming less and less normalized in the news. So we're just looking more at total platforms versus acquisitions.
Yeah, it's interesting because when Sirius acquired, however we want to say it, with Pandora and Stitcher, it's like, okay, how does 1 + 1 = 3 equal 3? And I don't know if we've actually seen that occur yet. I know that it has to be really, really hard. If you're Sirius, which has, they're using satellites, and that's innovative, and that's kind of has tech vibes. But at the end of the day, to a consumer, it functions a lot like radio stations, right? It's like a lot of national radio stations that you get access to, and some of that is premium content you can't get anywhere else. So they have the burden of having to grow and expand that platform, which is not customizable. I mean, take your favorite music format on SiriusXM and now compare that to what you're able to get from a Spotify experience. If you want to go down a rabbit hole into a genre, they know your preferences. They make recommendations based on those preferences. You can skip a lot easier. You can like things. These are things that are harder to do when you're listening to satellite radio through the radio. And so Sirius is kind of burdened with the idea that they have to advance one channel that is fundamentally associated with the old technology, with new technology of Pandora, which is a very different platform. And then all these shows that run across multiple platforms versus Spotify is kind of like, yeah, we've got one platform to push and we don't have legacy baggage to hold on to other than some maybe very expensive contracts they signed, but all of their roll-ups fed to the core, right? And so that's very challenging. And, you know, look, I think the good news if you're a marketer using these channels is Sirius has been the best friend of a performance marketer for a long, long time. And I believe it remains that way. The fact that there's a little bit of attrition on the subscribers, I don't think is a bad thing. It might even be a good thing because I think there's deals to be had. So being in a buyer's market, seeing a great asset like that, we want to see them succeed because they're great partners. But for brands, it's not only is it not your problem, it's your opportunity because it just means that there's revenue to replace it. Also, something to keep in mind, that business is, you know, their ad supported revenue streams are a rounding error. It's all subscriber revenue, right? So as an advertiser, I think there's a lot of benefits that come alongside that. So still a good time to buy SiriusXM and its various properties, but I think we're all kind of waiting to find out what the content thesis is or how they're going to manage really finding, I keep looking for a better word than synergies, but I can't find one, but like really finding synergies between these assets that they're trying to cobble together. Right. And on Spotify, go.
I was just on the SXM side, I think buried in there a little bit, even though their revenue was down 2%, their podcast business was doing quite well. It's really the subscription side of the business that's, you know, SXM losing 347,000 subscribers, Pandora flat, while their competitor Spotify gained. I think their monthly active users was 15 million above what they had guided the market. So, but the bright side on the SXM earnings report was podcasts is a bright spot for the company. It's just the subscriber side of the business which is struggling right now.
All right, so tell me if you've ever heard of any of these companies. Indeed, Shopify, NetSuite, Headspace, Quip, Theragun, Postmates. You know, I'm not only the host of the Media Roundtable, but also CEO of a company called Oxford Road, and we are the world's leading independently owned and operated audio ad agency. And what that means is that we help great companies, many that you have probably heard of on some of the other podcasts that you listen to. We help them test and scale campaigns in audio channels, with podcast being one of those leading channels. Some of the work that we do includes media planning and buying, as well as analytics, attribution, and insights. And we also have a very special way that we deal with creative and copy generation. We have our own proprietary process called Audiolytics that allows us to score ads for their persuasiveness. If you're looking to be involved in audio and you want a partner that can help work with you to make sure that you achieve unprecedented ROI and massive scale, you should get in touch with us at Oxford Road. And by the way, the only reason that we're able to do the work of the Media Roundtable is because we have a great team at Oxford Road that supports us and makes it possible. So, you know, what we're doing is not just a podcast, but we're really trying to help brands live out their values and balance that with their business objectives, which is an increasingly hard thing to do in this world of misinformation and malice that's infecting so much of our media. But at Oxford Road, we don't want to just broker this stuff. We want to impact the industry for good. We want to raise the bar on what gets created. And Oxford Road is helping make that possible through the Media Roundtable. So if you're somebody that's interested in working with an ad agency or a partner on this type of work for your advertising campaigns, go to oxfordroad.com. It's easy to spell. And get in touch with us, or at least just sign up for our free newsletter, The Influencer. That's oxfordroad.com.
This is Chris Howard, host of Plugged In with Chris Howard. The Kansas City Chiefs are heading to their fourth final in 5 years against a stacked San Francisco 49ers team. Not surprisingly, the Chiefs are currently a 1.5-point underdog. BetOnline is your number one source for up-to-the-minute odds, stats, trends, and lines. You can access the world's best wagering information from your desktop or your mobile device. Head to BetOnline today to stay updated on all the action. BetOnline, the game starts here.
Well, and I think if there's a lesson here for all of us who are focused on assessing business opportunities, the message I keep trying to remind myself is to focus. When you get too diversified, even if everything you're working on is good, that can, it's hard to win on multiple fronts. And that may have something to do with what we're seeing here as well. But we wish them all well. And I think the nice thing to say for Spotify, for performance marketers, is that we've seen a real renaissance while they've been adding a lot technically and for their programming, they've also taken an interest in performance marketers, which I think for a long time really wasn't a priority for them. And they really started leaning in with us and other shops and some of the leading performance marketers and saying, okay, how can we be a little easier to do business with? And we're seeing a lot of our partners start to do that during these times. There, a lot of them that maybe they were fat and happy and growing like crazy, so they didn't really need to care about all us dirty direct response folks. Now, all of a sudden, there's a lot more interest, and we're happy for anybody that wants to advocate for brands that are measuring the results of the ads. So it's been a good thing. So all of this is positive if you're on the buy side. If you're on the sell side, it's maybe a little bit more challenging. But we wish all these folks well. All right, let's move on a little bit, and I'm going to stop introducing stories. I'm going to let you guys introduce some stories. And Stu, I think you may have something that you thought was particularly important.
Yeah, I had something I wanted to roundtable.
Let's roundtable it.
Yeah, let's roundtable it. So survey shows half of podcast listeners are 35 to 44 years old. Who knew they were so young? Nevertheless, podcast is a growing channel to reach this demographic, 35 to 44-year-olds. Your older, more seasoned millennials that still think they're cool. If you want to speak to them, expanding reach with podcasts is advised, as well as tailoring messaging to them, such as beginning messaging around, beginning at this stage in their life, they're going to start waking up with back pain for those older millennials and start finally caring what a 401k is.
Yeah.
That becomes important. But no, we have a couple of stories about audiences, and I think that this one is interesting because podcasts, especially from being at Oxford Road since the beginning, that it's hip, it's cool, it's young people. And though I like to think 35 to 44 is young, it is older, and even older than that, we're seeing people in the podcast audience. And it's something to pay attention to with your targeting and with your messaging. So in all seriousness, it's like, we may be seeing the end of the beginning with podcasts. Like, podcast is growing up, and this is one of those signs.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of audience, because we covered it in the Influencer just this past week, where they talked about the boomer audience, and interesting where the boomer audience really has just not caught on with podcasts. I mean, the numbers stay stagnant. So what I think about, though, is we want to reach more. It's great that podcasts are younger, right? Because a lot of media skews to the older segments. But at the same time, you want to reach more segments with podcasts. So you want to grow the reach of the channel. So it's not necessarily a bad thing if the average age goes up a little bit, because you're reaching more audiences, you're reaching more diverse audiences. So I think of the 35 to 44, it's a great sweet spot to have as a channel, but there's a lot of opportunity outside of that specific audience, and I hope to see those other audiences grow as well.
So Neal, off the top of your head, if you got half of the people listening to podcasts in that 10-year bracket, where's the other half? Are there more of them younger or more of them older?
More of them younger.
More of them younger.
I think the 50 plus is something like 20% listen to podcasts on a monthly basis, where the average is 40%, right?
Well,
so
yeah. So what it seems to me is that as podcasts has come into everybody's consciousness, it really has had a sweet spot with people that were, 18 to 25, like 10 years ago when Serial came out. Who was listening? Like, who did that bring in? It seems like it's always been about adults. Like, if you're not an adult, I think you're TikTok and YouTube, and that's kind of your media, is the way it seems. But if you're, if you're allowed to be responsible for all your own actions, like, you start paying attention to these conversations. But the older generations seem like they may go down with the ship on some of the traditional media, is the way that it seems. I remember when I first started having come out of radio, there were a lot of companies we would work with on the performance side, and they would tell you to call this 800 number and talk to somebody on the phone. And it was somebody for your house or your tax debt or whatever. And when we would put them on podcasts, we found out this ain't going to work. Like, the people that are listening, they need something disruptive. They need something new. But two things have happened. One, those people who started have gotten older, which we're seeing. And then two, it's gotten so much buzz that older people have started coming in and engaging, but it sounds like not that much older. So if I'm a brand, like, give me the so what? Like, does this mean, hey, if you're selling something to a 55 plus crowd, like, forget podcast, like, where's the cliff and what's the application?
I don't think you completely forget podcasts, but you're not going to spend as much in podcasts for the 55 plus audience. And the research from Pew shows that you're going to spend it more in areas of learning, in news, if you're 50 plus, you're going for podcasts more for information, news, and learning, where, like, the 18 to 29-year-old, according Pew, is much more about entertainment. So there's a different kind of approach to the messaging to those different generations as well.
And
I think
say
that's a massive piece of it, as well as your messaging. Just thinking of the gap in age from a 24-year-old listener to a 44-year-old listener. That's a parent and a child. Do you talk to your cousins that are your age the same way you talk to your aunts and uncles? It's like, no. So as we can see the podcast audience better, and it's not just homogenized and it's one thing, it's as if it's a channel, and that's how we talk on that channel. There's an opportunity to be more nuanced in your messaging and speak specifically to those individuals.
So that's why all of our ads open up with, hello, other kids.
Hi, young people like me.
Yes.
hello, fellow
exactly.
kids.
Yes, fellow kids. All right, Spencer, you were going to make a point on this one.
I was just going to say, you also want to go with some of the more, like, top chart topping options in those genres, because oftentimes if you're coming into a new media type, nobody's doing that deep granular research to find options that are catered to their niche interests. They're going to go with the big ones that they know and love. Similarly, we mentioned Serial. That's how I got into podcasts in 2015. They're going to go for, The Daily and Pod Save America and some of the more chart topping options that they are like, oh, well, this is reputable. It's at the top of the chart.
I think when people start buying houses, that's when all of a sudden you become like a news junkie. Like, I think there's a direct correlation there. It's interesting, though, because if you think about who has the most wealth, it's always the older groups. And I remember having this conversation. We've had Bill Handel, who's a host in LA, on the show before. And I remember when I worked with him in terrestrial, his show got dropped from a buy that a big agency was doing because they said, you're great 35-64, but 25-54 not so good. And he was like, what, do we vanish when I turn 55? Do people lose their money when they turn 55? Why is it such a big deal to stay focused on this younger group? So it seems like what most marketers want, unless you're catering to a specifically younger or older audience, is you want that 25 to 54-year-old sweet spot, which podcast is now dead center in, right? That's where the middle of the bell curve is. But is that where the most money is, or why is there such a premium on that? Neal, maybe you have a perspective.
Well, I mean, I think there's still a ton of money that's spent in television, right? So in television, I think
what's television again?
It still exists for some people, especially, if you're above 50. I think the median age for TV is 55. So I think part of it is like, we feel like we're able to reach that audience in different channels. And so we want podcasts to serve a different purpose. However, that 35 to 64-year-old audience has a lot of money. They're more financially stable. They respond. So,
but it seems like when you look at big ad agencies working with big brands, they stop caring after you turn 55, which may be great for the podcast industry, but I don't know why it is that way practically. I guess if you have a multi-generational marketing strategy like Coca-Cola, okay, I might get that. But for everybody else, like, why is it so, precious that you have to stay in that specific little lane?
Yeah, I agree. Because so many times we get products that are either based in, have had legacy media campaigns that work, and we have the data to back up something similar for podcast. And those things are easier to find. And then we go look at everything else that we have tested previously, and we can't book it because it doesn't fit the age demo. So there needs to, in general, be more testing on older properties so that we can get that internally, as well as get some case studies.
That's right.
I was going to, I can speak a little bit for having planned television. I think you want to try to make sure that your TV is reaching, at least to a degree, the 25 to 54, because you're going to get the 55 plus.
They're going to show up anyway, so take them for granted. They're going to come.
Yeah, I mean,
don't cater to them.
I'm not saying don't cater to them, but from a media planning perspective, they're a lot easier to reach.
I get it. The cycle of life is brutal. Okay, let's move to another story, shall we? How about one introduced by Stu?
I'd be happy to. It's more.
We're not rotating today. We're really just taking turns.
We're picking a lane and we're sticking to it.
Yeah,
it's variations on the theme about generations. What's interesting is why it's iHeart's Patel podcasts need to better address listener diversity and generational differences. And again, it's this idea of nuance where it's like you can look at podcast as a channel. I'm coming on a podcast to do my messaging, and it's sort of like it's just a one-trick pony. But there are differences to these audience members. And Gen Z and Gen Alpha listeners are ones that are looking for companionship through listening to podcasts, unlike millennials who are mostly listening for educational reasons or to better themselves. You've got Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and that's also recent studies have shown you see more co-listening there as well. So there's these different listening habits for these different generations, and it's something to keep in mind as you're working on tailoring your messaging in the podcast space.
What's Gen Alpha?
Alpha follows Gen Z.
Yeah, but how old are the Gen Alpha folks right now? Do we know?
They got to be under 13 or something.
Yeah, they got to be really young. Wow. Okay. Well, people are trying to cater to that. I know we were just approached by a network that is specifically trying to focus on children's content and podcast.
Yeah,
So,
Gen
we'll
Alpha
see.
is between 2010 and 2025.
They don't even exist yet.
Your oldest alpha is 13. Well, okay, I'll say this from earlier off mic here. Neal and I were working on a project together, and I was remarking how one of my children, who is 13, listens to a storytime podcast.
Mhm.
That's like children's stories, like bedtime stories, and was remarking to me, asking me if we use ZipRecruiter here at our agency, and I was like, well, why is that? And they go, well, because it's the smartest way to hire.
Did you tell them about Indeed though? All right. Okay, Neal, Spencer, any thoughts on this topic?
I think the other thing that struck me in that piece was the diversity of the audience and having content that resonates with the Hispanic segment, African American segment, because those generations are way more diverse than kind of maybe the generation that I'm more familiar with, for instance, as a Gen X.
It seems like podcast has, it may not have reached as far to older audiences, but my understanding is that it is highly reflective of the cultural and the and the racial profiles of the country, or the people that it reaches, the people of that age range. It's not necessarily going to over-index or under-index like other channels. And that was not the way it started. Just to be super clear, it was like super tech, geeks and gamers, all dudes, like coasts for a long time. But it seems like this thing is spreading out, and it's just starting to look a lot like America profile wise. And I guess maybe what you're saying is the reason that's an opportunity is because they don't have to follow the formula of just trying to play against the charts and trying to have something that reaches everybody. Everybody can find different groups that they're going to laser focus on and super serve those audiences. And maybe that's, still one of the great strengths of the channel.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, Neal, Spencer, I know
Spencer has a view on this too.
Yeah, let's go.
My favorite part of that article was the quote Hital Patel lists about the difference between Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and Millennial. And we kind of touched on that already, that Millennial and Gen X are looking for information, and Gen Z, Gen Alpha are looking for companionship. And it's something that I've kind of been feeling out and trying to explain with simulcast, but I've never been able to put that into words, is that the reason simulcast keeps growing, right, is definitely like the interview-based podcast. Like Joe Rogan really pushed that along with getting that acquisition with Spotify, and Spotify putting the video component in, because a lot of times the things that are getting big are chat shows, society and culture, comedy. And that's because, you put it on. A lot of Gen Z or younger millennial are watching podcasts or listening to podcasts while they work, me included. And what I really like about it is that you just get to take in some information that might be less important, but you really get to listen to people, have a level of camaraderie and friendship that you usually don't get in an office environment. I go to the office once a week just to get that. But when I'm home and it's just me, and my dog and 15 meetings in a row, having that between each really helps me feel more integrated into the world and makes me feel good about what I'm doing, even if I don't have that.
Yeah, I think that's always been the strength of audio going back to radio, is that it, a lot of the voices that people would hear, they become members of the family. They live in the house with you, and you're cooking and they're telling you about something. And all of a sudden they're part of that experience. So it's a synthetic relationship, but it still does serve a lot of that for people that don't have somebody with them. And, we're social creatures. It's cool to see that's continuing to show up in the research. I know we're getting short on time, but Neal, why don't you race us through the next one?
Which one is that?
Oh, it's the one that number 4, insights on podcast usage in Japan.
How big are
from Neal
podcasts in
Lucey.
Japan?
How big are they in Japan?
Yeah.
They're not really big yet.
All right. Next story.
But what I was going to...
Oh.
No, what I want to say is I think we have brands that have international ambitions, and there's not a ton of great research on podcast usage outside the US. I mean, it can be hit or miss to find. So when you do see something that's pretty in depth, especially on a market like Japan, it's just worth taking note of. And I'm sure that we will link this in the influencer this coming week. And it what I found interesting, it was like, it's sort of like podcasts maybe 5 or 10 years ago, because it's like 16%. It's very young, like 18 to 29. It skews more male, like almost 60% of listeners are male. So, you know, it is definitely growing in Japan, but it's kind of like maybe 5 years behind where we are. So I thought that was interesting, but I also thought it was interesting that a lot of the similarities there's a lot of similarities of the listener with the US listener. And we find that in most other countries, younger, more affluent, a little bit more male. So these kind of consistencies are not just for the US, but they're for outside the US as well.
Spencer, do you have a thought on podcasts in Japan?
I think just anecdotally, I feel like Japan kind of pushes the culture in the US for young people quite a bit when it comes to the media that they put out and the amount of media they put out, and they do so at a different level than we do when it comes to so many things: animation, film, video games. And it kind of makes sense that is a little higher than we've seen in other countries' research, because again, when it comes to the social aspect, Japan has historically had a lot of issues with loneliness and a lack of human relationships that they try to figure out by optimizing human relationships in many ways. There's entire industries just around dating and relationship building via the internet in Japan. So it kind of makes a lot of sense they would find another way to come together, and that is through audio.
But does it surprise you that they're not ahead of the curve on adoption?
Not necessarily, because, you know, certain things are kind of in a bubble when it comes to media in certain countries. They are very ahead of the curve when it came to animation. They actually were ahead of the curve in film and had an extreme output versus the US, which was only decimated after World War II. I think podcast is just one of those things that has grown in the US based on investment and a specific culture, but I wouldn't say that it can't rise in Japan. It just maybe will be in a different form.
I think the one other thing, and what I've seen consistently in the international research, is if you have a good English speaking population in your country, you're more likely to listen to podcasts. If you have if it's a Spanish speaking country, you're more likely to listen to podcasts. And it comes down to, there's a lot of existing content that's available in those languages. And so for the Japanese market, it's really got to be homegrown. And so I think as the homegrown podcasts increase, then you'll have more listening, more content available, wider content, and then it will continue to grow.
And on that note, I think we're going to wrap. I think this was a pretty good conversation. What do you guys think? Good show today? Got a thumbs up from... Okay.
Very roundtable.
Sure.
Yes.
Very round table.
Edges rounded.
That's right. All right. Well, I just want to thank everybody for joining the Media Roundtable Industry Edition again. And if you're a marketer and you want to balance your business objectives with your brand values, not an easy thing to do, reach out to our agency. There's a lot of reasons you should reach out to our agency. Attribution problems, scale problems, performance problems. You got problems in audio? You're not maximizing your audio? Reach out to Oxford Road, oxfordroad.com. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. Thank you to our guests. We have Neal. Thank you. Stu. Thank you. Spencer. Thank you. Thank you to Haley, Bianca, and the team at Podcast One. And as always, influence responsibly.